My name is Savannah Blake, and yes, I am just a nurse, at least according to my family. I can practically hear my father's voice echoing in my head, dismissive and sharp. Savannah, you're wasting your potential in that little clinic of yours. People won't respect a nurse. They respect titles. My mother usually just nods along, her eyes a mix of pity and embarrassment, while my siblings smirk as if they've heard the joke 100 times. But here's the truth my family will never fully see. I own 3 private clinics, employ dozens of staff, and run them more efficiently than most doctors I know. The irony is delicious, though I don't get much joy from gloating. I prefer quiet victories. Before I get too carried away, if you enjoy real-life stories about perseverance and unexpected triumphs, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. You won't want to miss this one. Mornings are my sanctuary, the only time I get to move freely before the chaos of patients and paperwork swallows me whole. I pour my coffee black, slip into my white coat, and run through my checklist, check vitals, review charts, ensure the new interns aren't panicking over minor things. I like the rhythm, the predictability. Every patient I treat, every life I touch is tangible proof that I matter, that I am capable, that my work, though lowly in my family's eyes, actually changes lives. But today my rhythm was shattered before it even began. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the quiet like a siren, and my heart sank before I even looked at the screen. The hospital's caller ID flashed, and I felt a familiar tightness coil in my stomach. "Savannah Blake?" a nurse asked, her voice hurried but polite. "This is Mercy General. Your father, Richard Blake, has been admitted." There was a sudden episode, shortness of breath, chest pains. "He's stable for now, but we need someone to be present. Are you available?" I froze for a heartbeat. My father, stubborn, strong, untouchable in his own mind, was in a hospital bed because of a heart scare. My first instinct was anger, wrapped around a layer of panic. He had dismissed every health warning I'd ever hinted at. Eat healthier, take a break from work, don't ignore your symptoms. But he had never listened. And now here he was, my patient in a way I never anticipated. I grabbed my coat, shoved my phone into my bag, and bolted out the door. The city streets blurred past as I drove, my mind running faster than the car. How would he react to me here? Would he even acknowledge that I was a nurse? My chest tightened at the thought of him scoffing, the old sneer forming on his lips. I don't need my little nurse daughter fussing over me. When I arrived, the hospital lobby smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Families hurried past, some clutching flowers, some holding on to their own fears. I navigated the corridor to the cardiology ward, my footsteps echoing every second, stretching longer. Nurses and doctors glanced my way, some offering polite nods, others too busy to notice. And then I saw the room. My father was lying there, pale and slightly propped up on pillows, an oxygen mask dangling loosely on his face. His eyes flickered toward the door as I stepped in, a mixture of recognition and surprise crossing his features. My hand instinctively went to my stethoscope, hanging around my neck, and I felt a jolt of awareness. The hospital staff had already assigned me as his nurse. For a moment, I was frozen, my mind scrambling. Assigned as his nurse? Me? The irony was almost unbearable. Anger, frustration, and a twinge of satisfaction collided inside me. My father, the man who had spent decades undermining my career, now depended entirely on the skills he had always belittled. And he had no idea that I was more than just a nurse. I took a slow, measured breath and approached his bedside, masking the whirlpool of emotions threatening to spill out. I couldn't let him or anyone see me falter. I had to focus, to act, to prove without saying a word that I was in control here. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm of anticipation and suppressed resentment simmered. As I checked his vitals and reviewed his charts, the reality hit me. This wasn't just a routine shift. This was personal. Every decision I made, every adjustment I considered, carried weight beyond medicine. And every glance, every word exchanged with my father would be layered with unspoken history. I knew in that instant that nothing about this visit would be ordinary, and as he coughed slightly, struggling to sit upright, I felt the first sharp stab of the day's truth. My father, the man who had spent years dismissing me, was now my responsibility, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for how this story would unfold. The moment I walked into the small hospital room, my family's energy hit me like a cold wave. My mother hovered near the corner, clasping her hands nervously. My younger brother Patrick leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone, and my older sister Claire gave me a look that could only be described as thinly veiled amusement. And then there was him, my father, Richard Blake, lying on the bed, eyes flicking between the ceiling and me, as if I were a minor inconvenience in his carefully curated life. "Savannah," my mother said softly, her voice laced with that faint, almost involuntary pity I had grown to recognize over the years. I didn't expect you to come so quickly." I smiled tightly. "Of course. I was on my way as soon as I got the call," Patrick snorted. "Wow, look at you, rushing in like the hero nurse. Daddy's probably going to give you a gold star for showing up." I gritted my teeth but didn't respond. Claire, ever the silent observer, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Still playing nurse, huh?" My father coughed lightly, then wheezed. "I don't need a nurse hovering over me," he said, his tone more irritated than weak. "I'm fine." I suppressed the immediate urge to roll my eyes. This was classic Dad, pride wrapped in stubbornness, disguised as irritation. As I set up his monitor and checked his vitals, I felt the weight of decades of unspoken judgment pressing down on me. The room was tense, a battlefield of subtle insults and invisible scores. I took a deep breath, trying to separate the personal from the professional. But it wasn't easy. And then my mind drifted, as it often did when faced with his dismissive stare, to a long-ago dinner when I was 12. My father had been at the head of the table, speaking about ambition, titles, and real careers. I had shyly announced my desire to become a nurse. "You? A nurse?" he'd said, leaning back in his chair, smirking. "That's cute, Savannah. But maybe aim a little higher. Medicine? Law? Something people will respect?" I remember staring at my plate, my fork trembling slightly. My mother had smiled faintly, as if to soften the blow, but the words stung like acid. That moment, that single dinner, had shaped the quiet determination that led me to not only pursue nursing, but to eventually own multiple clinics. Shaking off the memory, I returned my focus to my father's current condition. I adjusted his IV and monitored the oxygen levels. "Dad, you need to cooperate with me. I need you to take deep breaths and stay calm," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I don't need a lecture from you," he muttered, shifting slightly under the covers. "I've been fine without it for 60 years. I fought to keep my expression neutral. "This isn't about lectures. It's about your health. And right now, your heart isn't in a place where arguing helps," Claire snorted. "She's so dramatic. Dad, really, let her do her thing. You might learn something," I wanted to snap. To remind them all that the little nurse in the corner of their minds was now running clinics, employing dozens of staff and handling medical emergencies that would make their heads spin. But I held my tongue. Actions, not words, would speak louder. Minutes passed in a tense rhythm. My father's vitals remained borderline, his blood pressure rising slightly with every sarcastic comment from my siblings. I adjusted the medication carefully, ensuring he remained stable, while internally steeling myself against the subtle attacks that came from family members who refused to see me as anything more than just a nurse. And then it happened. A sudden spike in his heart rate set off a monitor alarm. The screen flashed red, sharp, and insistent, echoing in the small room. I leaned closer, quickly assessing the readings. My father's face went pale, and even Patrick dropped his phone, eyes wide. "What is it?" my mother gasped, stepping closer. "I'm not sure yet," I said calmly, though my pulse quickened. "But it looks like there's a deeper issue, something we need to address immediately." My father's hand shot up weakly. "Savannah, don't panic." "I'm not panicking, Dad," I interrupted firmly. "But we need to take this seriously," Claire muttered under her breath. I knew she'd overreact. I ignored her, focusing entirely on the monitor. My mind raced, running through possible complications. Arrhythmia, medication side effects, underlying heart disease that had gone unnoticed. Every scenario added tension, and I could feel the unspoken fear radiating from my mother. Even Patrick's smug demeanor had vanished, replaced by genuine concern. For a moment, the room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitors and the faint hum of the hospital's overhead ventilation. The sudden seriousness of the situation made the years of snide remarks, dismissive glances, and belittling comments seem trivial in comparison, but no less infuriating. I knew that in the next few minutes, everything would shift. My father's condition demanded attention. The family's facade of composure was crumbling, and the truth about what I was capable of had yet to be revealed. As I reached for the emergency medication, I caught my father's eye. For the first time in decades, I saw a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. He had underestimated me for far too long, and in that moment, I realized that the events unfolding now weren't just about his health. They were about rewriting the story he had told himself, about me for 31 years. But what I didn't yet know was just how serious this underlying issue could be, and how far I would have to push to save him. I took a steadying breath and scanned my father's charts again. The monitors beeped rhythmically, but I sensed something off. Not in the data, but in the subtle cues his body was giving me. A faint tremor in his left hand, almost imperceptible unless you were trained to notice it. A slight irregularity in his pulse that hadn't triggered the alarms yet. Most people would have overlooked these details, but years of nursing had sharpened my instincts. "Dad?" I said softly, placing my hand gently over his wrist. "I need you to relax for a moment and let me check a few things." He snorted, a mix of annoyance and pride. I said, "I'm fine." "You don't need to fuss." I kept my tone steady, refusing to rise to the bait. "This isn't fussing. This is ensuring you make it through the night in one piece." My mother hovered near the bed, wringing her hands. "Savannah, are you sure you know what you're doing? Maybe we should call a cardiologist." I nodded slightly, acknowledging her concern without letting it undermine me. I am aware of every variable in his care plan. I've managed similar cases many times before. I know what to do. Patrick rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. "She's probably reading her little manuals again, acting like she's some genius." Claire leaned against the wall with arms crossed. "Well, this is rich. Dad's getting lectured by the nurse who probably didn't even own a clinic." My jaw clenched, but I refused to snap. Words were cheap. Results were everything. I adjusted the oxygen slightly, monitored his blood pressure, and placed a stethoscope against his chest. That tremor in his hand, the slight irregularity I'd felt, both subtle but significant, pointed to something deeper than anyone suspected. "See that?" I said, tapping the screen. "His cardiac rhythm is unstable. If we don't adjust his medication and monitor him closely, this could escalate rapidly." Patrick scoffed. "It's probably nothing. He's fine." "You're overreacting." I met his gaze evenly. "If we ignore it, it could become serious overnight. Trust me, this isn't about overreacting. It's about preventing a crisis." My father coughed again, more forcefully this time. "Savannah, stop bossing everyone around. Just let me rest." I softened my voice, careful not to let frustration seep in. "I'm not bossing anyone. I'm making sure you get through this safely. I promise you, this matters more than pride right now." My mother's lips pressed together. Claire leaned back, her expression skeptical but quieter. Patrick's phone was still in his hand, though he kept glancing at me nervously now. Slowly, the room's energy began to shift, subtle, almost imperceptible. They were starting to see that I was in control, whether they wanted to admit it or not. I continued my rounds, checking vitals, noting minor fluctuations in his oxygen levels. And then I spotted it, a small, almost imperceptible reaction at the IV site. Slight swelling, faint redness. Not alarming by itself, but paired with the other subtle symptoms. It told me that one of the medications he had been on for days could actually worsen his condition if continued overnight. "Wait," I said, pausing as I scrolled through the medication list. "This dosage, it could cause arrhythmia if left unchecked. Overnight, it could destabilize his heart." My mother gasped. "Oh my God, Savannah, you mean this medication, he could?" I cut her off gently. "It's not too late. We can adjust it. But if we wait, it becomes dangerous. I need to contact the pharmacy and make the necessary changes immediately." Patrick's brow furrowed. "Are you serious? Just a nurse, right? How do you even know this?" I held his gaze firmly. "I've been trained to notice these things. Years of nursing experience, dozens of cases, and a careful review of his charts tell me this is urgent. This isn't about titles. It's about facts and action." Claire shook her head. "Titles matter, Savannah. People will respect you more if you had, I don't know, an MD after your name." I took a slow, controlled breath, keeping my voice calm, though the room's tension made it tremble slightly. "I don't need anyone's respect to do my job effectively. What matters is keeping him safe." My father's eyes narrowed, a flicker of begrudging acknowledgement there. You know what you're doing, huh?" I gave a small nod, letting the silence reinforce my point. He was defiant, but even he couldn't deny the weight of my expertise. I reached for the phone to call the pharmacy and coordinate the medication adjustment when my mind raced through every possible complication. I had handled emergencies before, but this was personal. Every decision mattered more because he was my father. And the subtle cues I had noticed were only the beginning. I could feel the tension in the room building like a storm cloud ready to break. The family's skepticism was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but the seriousness of the situation had them temporarily subdued. For now, and then it hit me, a detail I hadn't considered until just now. One of the medications listed wasn't just a risk. It had the potential for a dangerous interaction with another drug he was taking. If left unchanged overnight, it could trigger severe complications, possibly endangering his life. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a minor correction. This was a critical intervention, and the responsibility was mine alone. I swallowed hard, my fingers hovering over the phone. We need to act on this now, I murmured to myself, aware that the next few minutes would define everything. Knew that this discovery wasn't just a medical complication. It was the first real test of whether my family would finally see me for who I truly was. I stepped back for a moment, letting the room's tension settle around me as I observed my father's labored breathing. The monitors were stable for now, but the subtle warning signs I had seen earlier gnawed at me. I felt a tight knot of anxiety in my chest, not just for him, but for the flood of memories that came rushing back. I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. Nursing had always been more than a job. It was a statement, a quiet rebellion against the expectations of my family. Every late night in the hospital, every extra shift, every patient I comforted while my family belittled my humble profession had been a brick in the foundation of my independence. And then came the clinics, the culmination of years of planning, savings, and meticulous work. My first clinic had been the hardest. I remember standing in that tiny, empty office, the smell of new paint heavy in the air, staring at the blank walls with a mixture of excitement and fear. The paperwork had been suffocating, the approvals endless, and I had questioned myself countless times. Would my father ever respect me if he knew I owned it? Would my siblings finally have reason to mock me even more if they discovered my success? The pride I felt in taking those first steps toward ownership was tinged with fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, and the ever-present shadow of their disapproval. I had learned to thrive in silence. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their validation. And yet, part of me had always wondered if their recognition would make the struggle feel less lonely. Was it truly about proving them wrong, or was it about proving myself right? That question had followed me through the years, quietly gnawing at my confidence in moments I least expected. Looking at my father now, so stubborn, so resistant, I felt that same familiar tension. I wanted him to see me, not just as the nurse assigned to his care, but as the woman who had built something of value on her own terms. And yet I knew that desire was fraught with danger. Wanting his approval, even silently, could cloud my judgment. My priority had to remain his health, not my ego, not the satisfaction of a long overdue acknowledgement. I glanced at the room again, noticing the subtle worry etched on my mother's face, the conflicted expressions of my siblings. None of them understood the scope of what I had accomplished outside these walls. None had seen the countless nights spent poring over clinic budgets, staff schedules, patient histories, and regulatory paperwork. They hadn't seen the exhaustion, the pressure, the triumphs that never made it into family conversations. I allowed myself a brief smile, bittersweet, at the quiet knowledge that I had succeeded despite them, not because of them. And yet, a pang of loneliness hit me. Recognition from others was fleeting. Praise was temporary. The truth I had built my life on, the value of my work, the tangible difference I made in lives, was something only I could fully feel. I had spent so long compartmentalizing my family's disdain, ignoring the subtle jabs, that I wondered if the approval I craved deep down would ever truly matter, or if I had finally arrived at the place where I no longer needed it. The flashbacks faded as I returned my attention to my father. The monitors were beeping steadily, but then, almost imperceptibly, his oxygen saturation dipped. My pulse quickened. I leaned closer, scanning the readouts. His breathing had grown shallower, and a faint pallor had crept across his skin. The subtle symptom that had troubled me earlier was escalating. "Dad," I said sharply, placing my hand over his chest to steady him. "I need you to stay with me. This is important." He coughed violently, his body tensing as he struggled to draw a full breath. Savannah, No. I interrupted gently but firmly, my voice steady despite the rapid thrum of my heart. Not yet. Breathe. Focus on me. Trust me. The room's atmosphere shifted immediately. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Claire's eyes widened, Patrick's earlier smirk completely gone. Even my father, stubborn as he was, looked at me with a flicker of raw vulnerability. I ran through possibilities in my mind. Dosage adjustments, potential drug interactions, fluid levels, oxygen support. Every second counted. Every decision mattered. And despite the flash of fear curling in my chest, I reminded myself, this was my element. Years of training, experience, and quiet resilience had prepared me for this moment. But there was no time for reflection now. The subtle signs had evolved into something far more serious. If I didn't act immediately, the consequences could be catastrophic. My hands moved with practiced precision, grabbing charts, calculating medication adjustments, preparing for the intervention that could stabilize him or save him entirely. I swallowed hard, forcing my thoughts into sharp focus. This wasn't about pride, family recognition, or validation. This was about life, his life. And for the first time, I realized that in the storm of family expectations and past slights, my ability to act decisively was the one thing that truly mattered. And just as I was about to administer the critical intervention, a sudden spike in his heart rate jolted me, confirming my worst fears. The night was far from over, and the real challenge was only beginning. The sudden spike in my father's heart rate was like a punch to the gut. Alarms blared and red lights flashed on the monitors. My hands moved instinctively, but the tension in the room was palpable. Even with my experience, nothing prepared me for the feeling of seeing someone you love teeter on the edge, the stakes magnified by decades of unspoken tension between us. A young nurse hovered near the doorway, clipboard trembling slightly. "Savannah, are you sure about adjusting the dosage? Maybe we should call the cardiologist?" she asked hesitantly. I turned, meeting her worried eyes. "I've reviewed his charts. I've double-checked the interactions. This adjustment is necessary to stabilize him immediately. Waiting for a doctor now could be dangerous," she swallowed, clearly uncertain. My mother shifted uncomfortably, gripping the edge of the bed, while my siblings whispered to each other, their skepticism barely masked. Even Patrick, usually indifferent, looked as if he might bolt at any moment. I could feel the weight of every doubt they harbored pressing against me. Their eyes screamed, "Are you really capable?" And my father, my stubborn, proud father, was still clutching the bedsheet like a lifeline, muttering, "I don't need lectures from you." This was the moment I had trained for, but it was also the moment I realized my usual humility might not be enough. The subtle symptoms I had detected were now escalating into a real crisis. Arrhythmia triggered by the medication he had been on for days, compounded by minor fluid imbalances. If I didn't act decisively, the next few hours could spiral into a life-threatening situation. I adjusted the IV, monitored his vitals, and recalculated the safe dosage with precise attention. But as I prepared to administer the correction, the young nurse looked at me with doubt flickering in her eyes. "But aren't you worried about making a mistake? What if—" I took a deep breath. Her hesitation was natural, but there was no time for second-guessing. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said firmly. "This isn't about pride. This is about saving a life," Patrick scoffed from the corner. "Yeah, sure. She runs a few clinics. Big deal. How's that helping Dad right now?" I paused. That name, clinics, tipped the internal scales. My secret, long-guarded, flashed in my mind. Revealing it could shift the room's energy instantly. On the other hand, letting it remain hidden would maintain the tension, forcing me to assert authority purely through skill. The ethical dilemma gnawed at me. Should I expose my ownership to command respect and ensure compliance from both staff and family? Or should I handle the crisis quietly, letting my actions speak for themselves and preserving the professional boundaries I had always respected? Every instinct in me screamed, "Wait, act carefully. Don't let emotions compromise judgment." But the rising tension, the skeptical glances, and the subtle undercurrent of doubt made the choice harder. My father's heartbeat spiked again, the monitor's warning tone shrill in the air. I had mere seconds to decide. I glanced at the young nurse again. She hesitated, clearly unsure of whether to follow my instructions. My siblings' whispers had turned into low murmurs. Claire's arms crossed tightly, Patrick pacing. My mother's eyes were wide, glistening with fear. The room demanded authority, not quiet competence. I swallowed hard and made the decision. The truth, carefully framed, could tip the balance in my favor and reinforce the fact that underestimation was never something I tolerated. "Listen," I said, my voice steady but carrying a weight it hadn't before. "I've trained for this, not only as a nurse, but as someone who manages multiple clinics, private facilities where patients' lives depend on my decisions every single day. This isn't just theory or practice rounds. I run the operations, the staff, the entire care system. I know what I'm doing, and right now, you need to trust me." The room went silent. Even my father's wheezing quieted as he looked up at me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Claire's jaw dropped slightly, her expression caught between disbelief and a grudging acknowledgement. Patrick stopped pacing, staring at me like he'd just realized he had underestimated me his entire life. The young nurse blinked rapidly, then nodded, her uncertainty replaced with obedience. "Okay, yes, do what you need to do," she said quietly. I moved swiftly, adjusting the IV dosage, recalculating the administration time, and monitoring every change. My father's vitals began to stabilize slowly, the subtle tremor in his hand easing. I felt a cautious relief, tempered by the knowledge that the night was far from over. But the revelation had already shifted the room's energy. Skepticism had turned into cautious respect. Even my father, stubborn as ever, managed a faint nod, acknowledging, without words, that I was more than the little nurse he had dismissed for decades. I could feel the internal storm settling slightly. Yet the ethical dilemma had left a residue I couldn't ignore. Had I revealed my clinics too soon? Would this create resentment, jealousy, or dependency? Could my family now see me only as a figure of authority, rather than the daughter they had always underestimated? I didn't have time to dwell on it. Every second counted. Actions mattered more than perceptions now. I focused entirely on stabilizing him, while the room gradually absorbed the weight of my disclosure. The tension hadn't vanished. It had shifted, sharpened, and transformed into something more tangible. And as I watched my father slowly regain steadier breathing, I realized the bold step I had taken had done more than assert authority. It had changed the entire dynamic in the room. They would never underestimate me again. But the night was far from over, and the complications lurking beneath the surface promised that my next choices would be even more critical. The monitor's steady beeping was a small comfort against the storm of emotions swirling in the room. My father's vitals were stabilizing, and the immediate crisis had passed. But the tension between us hadn't. His gaze, which had always been so sharp, so unyielding, now held a flicker of something unfamiliar: uncertainty. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to stop holding back. The secret I'd carried for years, the ownership of multiple clinics, had always been a quiet shield, a testament to my independence, my capability. But tonight, in the thick of urgency and fear, the time had come to reveal it fully. "Everyone," I began, keeping my voice calm, "there's something I haven't shared with any of you." I let my eyes meet each of theirs in turn, letting the weight of anticipation settle. I don't just work as a nurse. I own multiple private clinics. I manage staff, finances, patient care. I'm responsible for dozens of lives every day. And yes, I built this from scratch. The room went silent. Even the machines seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Claire's eyes widened, and Patrick's jaw slackened. And then there was my father. He blinked slowly, as though trying to comprehend what I had just said. You what?" he asked finally, his voice low, almost unsteady. The defiance in his tone wavered for the first time in decades. I nodded, keeping my composure. I built these clinics because I wanted to create something meaningful, something that mattered. Not for recognition, not for your approval, but for me, and for the people whose lives I touch. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was heavy with the weight of years of misunderstanding, assumptions, and subtle contempt. I could feel the shift in the room, a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps they had underestimated me far too long. My father leaned back slightly, his hand gripping the bedsheet. I didn't know," he admitted finally, his voice rough. "I had no idea you were capable of this." The words hung in the air, unpolished, unpracticed. Not an apology, but the beginning of something real. I could see the flicker of regret in his eyes, a crack in the armor of his pride. Claire crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. So all those times we joked about you being just a nurse, you were doing this behind our backs? There was a mixture of embarrassment and resentment in her tone, a recognition of her own ignorance. Patrick's voice was quieter than usual, and we never knew. There was a sharp edge of guilt underlying the words, an acknowledgement that he had been complicit in underestimating me. I shook my head slightly. I didn't tell any of you because I didn't need validation. I didn't need your approval to succeed. I wanted to prove to myself that I could, and I did. But now, it seems you finally realized that perhaps the little nurse you dismissed has a backbone you never noticed. My mother's lips trembled. Savannah, she faltered, struggling for words, caught between pride, embarrassment, and a long history of unspoken misunderstandings. I took a step closer to my father. Dad, all those years of dismissing me, questioning my career, making me feel small, it hurt, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. But tonight isn't about punishment. It's about recognition. And for once, I need you to acknowledge me, not as your nurse, but as your daughter who built something remarkable despite everything. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability I had always yearned to see. Savannah, he said, voice trembling, I was wrong. I judged you unfairly. I let my pride blind me to your capabilities. I'm sorry. The apology was awkward, but genuine. I nodded, letting a fraction of the tension slip away. Thank you. That means more than you realize, Claire muttered under her breath, but softer this time. I guess I owe you an apology, too. For the comments, for everything? Patrick nodded silently, and even my mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a moment, there was a fragile stillness in the room, a quiet acknowledgement that things had shifted. But the question lingered in my mind, could this lead to real reconciliation, or was it simply the temporary respect forced by circumstance? Could I trust them to see me as more than the sum of my family-defined roles? Or would their acknowledgement always be conditional, dependent on my continued demonstration of competence? I allowed myself a slow exhale, knowing that the emotional confrontation had reached a temporary resolution, but not full closure. I had asserted my independence, revealed the truth, and received acknowledgement, but the deeper question remained. How much could I allow myself to open my heart to a family that had spent decades undermining me? My father reached out, his hand brushing mine lightly. Savannah, I don't deserve this, he murmured, his eyes holding the rare shimmer of humility. But I want to try. I smiled faintly, careful not to let my emotions cloud my focus. We'll see, Dad. One step at a time. As I turned to adjust the monitor and ensure his recovery continued smoothly, a part of me wondered, could this fragile truce evolve into something lasting? Or was it simply the illusion of reconciliation, a temporary calm before the storms of old habits returned? I'd done what I could in that moment, revealed my truth, asserted my worth, and faced the family's assumptions head on. The rest was up to them, and as I watched my father resting more peacefully, I realized that no matter what happened next, I had claimed my independence, my authority, and my self-respect, and that was a victory I would carry with me, whether they fully embraced it or not. By the time morning light spilled through the hospital window, my father's condition had stabilized. The monitors beeped steadily, his vitals almost back to normal, and for the first time in hours, a quiet sense of relief settled over me. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting myself exhale fully, feeling the tension in my shoulders dissolve. The crisis was past, for now, but the emotional turbulence lingered in the room like a faint echo. I watched him sleep, the lines of pain on his face softened, and I felt an unexpected wave of gratitude. Not for their approval, not yet, but for the opportunity to act decisively, to use my knowledge, experience, and instincts to help someone I loved. For the first time, I recognized the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing you are capable, that you can rise to the occasion when it truly matters. After checking the charts one last time, I decided it was time to step out. I needed space to reflect, to absorb the events of the night, and to reconnect with myself beyond the hospital walls. Driving away from Mercy General, the city's early morning hum seemed calmer, almost supportive. I allowed myself a private smile, a small acknowledgement of how far I had come, not just as a nurse, but as someone who had built her own life, her own success, without waiting for validation from the very people who had doubted her. I decided to visit one of my clinics, a modest but thriving facility tucked in the quieter part of town. Walking through the familiar doors, the scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint aroma of coffee and paperwork felt comforting. Staff greeted me warmly. No skepticism, no doubts, just recognition of my role as both leader and caregiver. I paused in the reception area, observing the flow of activity. Patients being guided with care, nurses coordinating efficiently, my systems running smoothly even in my absence. It struck me, then, that this was a moment of triumph in its quietest form. No speeches, no fanfare, just the tangible evidence of my efforts, skill, and perseverance. I allowed myself to walk through the corridors slowly, silently appreciating the impact of my work. I wasn't seeking applause from my family. This was proof enough. I was capable. I mattered. My success was mine, and no one could diminish it. A call from my father's room flashed across my phone screen, but I let it go to voicemail, choosing instead to immerse myself in this quiet celebration of self-recognition. Later, the messages and calls from family would come. Apologies, tentative gratitude, maybe even curiosity about my clinics. But I knew their respect was no longer necessary to define my worth. I had earned it in ways they couldn't diminish, and that was empowering. Back at home that evening, the family dynamic had subtly shifted. My mother lingered near me, offering a gentle smile, an acknowledgement of the events she had witnessed. Claire approached, her tone softer, less sarcastic, asking questions about the clinics in a genuine effort to understand. Patrick, though quieter, had stopped making jabs and offered small gestures of cooperation. Even my father, still stubborn in many ways, gave me a brief nod of recognition, unspoken, yet sincere. I realized then that respect, when earned through skill, consistency, and integrity, has a different quality than the superficial recognition of titles or wealth. It wasn't about their praise, it was about knowing that I had proven, to myself above all, what I was capable of. Their shift in attitude was a bonus, not a prerequisite for my self-worth. Later that night, as I sat alone reviewing clinic reports, my phone buzzed. A former patient's name appeared on the screen. "Savannah?" the voice asked, a note of urgency and excitement threading through the greeting. "I wanted to run an idea by you. It's a project that could expand the services you're offering, and I think you'd be perfect for it. Are you available to discuss it tomorrow?" I leaned back in my chair, a small smile tugging at my lips. Even after the night's turmoil and the family confrontations, life was moving forward. Challenges and opportunities awaited, not as tests of approval from anyone else, but as chances to grow, to apply my skills, and to continue building the life I wanted on my own terms. I glanced around the quiet office, the soft hum of air conditioning and faint tapping of my keyboard grounding me. For the first time in a long while, I felt entirely aligned with myself. My father's health was recovering, my family was beginning to see me in a new light, and my clinics, my life's work, were thriving. But most importantly, I had claimed my own power, my own authority, and my own sense of self. The call ended, leaving me with the faint echo of possibility. Tomorrow would bring a new challenge, a new opportunity to shape the future. And as I stared out the window at the city lights fading into the night, I felt a quiet thrill, knowing that I was ready to face whatever came next, fully aware of my strength, my capabilities, and my independence. The journey wasn't over. Life had more tests, more triumphs, more lessons, and I was ready for all of it. I walked into my office the next morning, the sun spilling warm light across the reception desk and tiled floors. The quiet hum of activity greeted me. Patients checking in, nurses coordinating seamlessly, and my staff moving with the precision I had cultivated over years. I paused for a moment, letting the scene wash over me, and felt a surge of quiet pride. This, every detail, every life impacted, was a testament not to my family's approval, but to my own perseverance and skill. They called me the outcast nurse, I murmured to myself, a smile tugging at my lips. But I never needed their approval. I only needed to trust myself. The mantra felt heavier than words, yet lighter than any burden I had carried in decades. I had lived it, proven it, and internalized it. Every decision I had made through the past few days, through the crisis, the confrontation, and the revelation, had led to this clarity. My father's words from the hospital echoed in my mind, awkward but genuine. "I was wrong. I judged you unfairly. I'm sorry. That brief acknowledgement had softened a portion of the long-standing tension between us. I didn't need grand gestures or heartfelt speeches to feel validated. Their subtle respect, the nods, the quiet cooperation, the softened gazes, was enough. I felt no bitterness, only recognition that the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I could exist fully as myself in their presence without shrinking or accommodating their prejudices. I moved through the clinic corridors with purpose, checking on staff, observing interactions, and reviewing patient charts. Each step reminded me of the long path I had carved alone, the sleepless nights, the endless paperwork, and the constant balancing of compassion and authority. This was my domain, my creation, and I was proud of it, not because anyone else could see it, but because I knew the work, the dedication, and the impact behind it. Later, as I returned home briefly to check on my father, he was sitting quietly in the living room, a faint smile on his face. He gestured toward me, no words necessary. I understood the gesture fully. Acknowledgement, tentative respect, and perhaps a hint of admiration for the woman he had underestimated for far too long. My mother lingered nearby, offering a gentle nod. Claire and Patrick were busy with their own routines, yet their demeanor toward me carried subtle deference I hadn't seen before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And I didn't need more than that. I settled into my home office later that evening, reviewing expansion plans for my clinics. The idea had been simmering for months, and now, with the recent events behind me, I felt ready to act on it. This was more than professional ambition. It was the embodiment of my independence, my ability to shape the future on my own terms. I could feel the pulse of possibility, new clinics, new services, and a vision that no one could define for me but myself. As I tapped through spreadsheets and mapped out potential locations, I felt a sense of calm triumph. Every challenge, every slight, every doubt, internal and external, had forged me into someone unshakable. I was still Savannah Blake, the nurse they once mocked, but also a clinic owner, a decision maker, and a woman who had learned to trust herself fully. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Life would continue to present challenges, opportunities, and unexpected moments, but I was ready for them. My path was no longer defined by family perception or societal expectation. It was defined by me, my choices, and the steady confidence I carried in my own abilities. A small ping from my phone broke my reflection. A former colleague had sent a brief message about a potential collaboration with a new health initiative. I read it, smiled, and set it aside for the morning. The world was moving forward. And so was I. Empowered, confident, and entirely in control of my journey. I whispered the mantra again, more firmly this time. They called me the outcast nurse, but I never needed their approval. I only needed to trust myself. The words resonated deeper than ever, echoing not just in my mind, but in every action I took. Every patient I treated, every clinic I managed, every decision I made, from the small adjustments to life-altering crises, was proof of my strength, my independence, and my unwavering self-worth. And as I turned back to my plans for expansion, I realized that this was only the beginning. Success, respect, and fulfillment weren't rewards to be earned from others. They were states I could claim for myself every single day. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long while, I embraced it without hesitation. I was Savannah Blake, skilled, independent, and unstoppable. And this was my life, exactly as it was meant to be.